It began as a quiet morning inside Buckingham Palace, until one royal guard stumbled on a document he was never meant to see. A single page, a single name, and within 47 seconds, Queen Camilla's carefully guarded secret started to unravel. What he read could shatter royal bloodlines, shake the monarchy, and rewrite family history itself. What would you do if the truth in your hands could destroy a queen? This is the untold story of loyalty, truth, and the royal scandal that almost changed everything. Before we dive deeper into this emotional royal drama, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss another inside look at Britain's royal world. Give this video a like if you believe truth always finds a way to surface, and share it with someone who follows the royal family as closely as you do. Now, let's step behind the palace gates and uncover what really happened. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Buckingham Palace. The air outside was crisp, the flag above the gates fluttered against a pale London sky, and the palace guards stood motionless, perfect symbols of order and silence. Among them was Sergeant Thomas Bennet, a man whose entire life had been built around one word: duty. For 15 years, he'd served the royal family without a single blemish on his record. He'd protected kings, princes, and visiting dignitaries. He'd stood through storms, ceremonies, and protests. He'd seen thousands of faces come and go, but never one moment where the world inside those golden walls felt truly unpredictable. Until now. At precisely 7 a.m., Thomas's radio buzzed. The message was short and coded. He was to report immediately to Commander Harrison's office. That alone was unusual. Palace orders rarely came without context. Thomas stepped inside the west corridor, his boots echoing against the marble floors. The palace always felt colder when it was quiet, as if the silence itself guarded more secrets than the people did. When he entered the commander's office, Harrison's expression was grim. He was an older man with 30 years of service, and the kind of weathered face that carried stories no one dared to ask about. But this morning he looked uneasy, his brow furrowed, fingers drumming against a sealed envelope. "Sergeant Bennet," Harrison said, motioning for him to close the door. That was the first sign this wasn't routine. Orders for a royal guard were rarely private. Once the door clicked shut, the commander slid the envelope across the desk. The royal crest gleamed on the wax seal. "Her Majesty Queen Camilla has requested a personal escort. Discreet. Off the record." Thomas blinked. Off the record? He'd accompanied members of the royal family countless times, to hospitals, charities, and private estates, but always under official schedule and protocol. A discreet assignment from the Queen herself was another level entirely. "Destination?" Thomas asked. Harrison hesitated before replying. "A private medical facility in Kensington. You're to accompany her personally. No staff, no press, no documentation. You'll remain silent about the visit." Thomas nodded slowly. Understood. But his instincts buzzed. Royals often needed privacy, yet something about this secrecy felt different. He glanced again at the sealed letter, wondering what was hidden beneath that crest. Why 9:30 a.m.? A sleek black car rolled quietly through the rear service entrance of Buckingham Palace. Thomas stood ready beside it, uniform pressed, expression unreadable. When the private lift opened, Queen Camilla stepped out.
She wasn't wearing her usual regal attire. No jewels, no brooches, no signature pastels. Just a navy coat, dark sunglasses, and a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Even through her disguise, Thomas noticed something rare: nervousness. He'd seen her charm crowds, handle state banquets, even deflect reporters' intrusive questions with a smile. But today, she avoided eye contact, her fingers twisting her handbag strap as if it were the only thing tethering her calm. "Morning, Sergeant," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but thin around the edges. "Your Majesty," he replied, opening the car door. The Queen sat in silence during the 40-minute drive. The hum of London traffic filled the air, but she never spoke. Occasionally, she checked her watch, almost counting the minutes. Thomas stayed alert but respectful. He wasn't there to ask questions, only to protect. Yet something about the entire situation gnawed at him. Why would the Queen need a secret appointment at a private facility? When they arrived, the building didn't look like a hospital at all. From the outside, It was a quiet townhouse with no visible signs or staff. Only a single brass doorbell and a curtained window. A woman in a white coat opened the door before they knocked. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell," she introduced herself, bowing slightly. "We've been expecting you, Your Majesty." Thomas followed him inside, but stopped when the doctor gestured toward a side door. "I'm afraid this is a private consultation. You can wait in the security room." He nodded. The room was small and sterile. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and a monitor displaying the clinic's internal cameras. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Thomas glanced at the screen occasionally, watching the Queen seated in an examination room, speaking calmly with Dr. Mitchell. Everything looked routine. Then a quiet knock. A young technician slipped into the room, clutching a folder. Her face was pale, her hands unsteady. "Sorry, sir," she whispered. "Just need to grab some files from the cabinet." Thomas nodded. She opened the cabinet hastily, muttering under her breath. And then she dropped the folder. Papers scattered across the floor. Thomas instinctively bent to help. "Here," he said, gathering the nearest sheets. But as he lifted one page, his eyes froze. At the top, bold black letters read, "DNA Analysis Report." And below that, "Camilla Parker Bowles, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom." His heart thudded. He tried to look away, but his eyes betrayed him. Words leapt off the page: comparative markers, biological relationship, paternity test. The technician's face turned crimson. She snatched the pages from his hand, mumbling an apology before rushing out, folder pressed tight to her chest. The door clicked shut. Thomas stood still, pulse pounding in his ears. What had he just seen? Why was the Queen undergoing a DNA test? And why in secret? He told himself to sit, to breathe, to forget. That was his duty. But the thought clawed at his mind, louder with every tick of the clock. When Dr. Mitchell finally returned nearly an hour later, her smile was polite, but her eyes gave her away. She looked uneasy. Her Majesty is ready to leave. As Thomas followed her down the hallway, his gaze landed on the Queen. Her eyes were red, her makeup faintly smudged. The woman who'd faced global scrutiny for decades, unflinching, composed, now looked fragile. Something was very wrong. Dr. Mitchell whispered something to Queen that Thomas couldn't catch. Whatever it was, it made her expression harden. Then she turned to him. "Sergeant Bennett," she said quietly, "has anyone spoken to you while you were waiting?" Thomas hesitated. "Only a technician, ma'am. She came for some papers." The Queen's lips tightened. "Did you see any of them?" The question hit like ice. She was testing him. He could lie, claim ignorance, pretend nothing had happened. But honesty was bred into him as deeply as loyalty. "Yes, Your Majesty," he said finally, by accident, just a page heading. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, almost in a whisper, "We need to talk privately." Dr. Mitchell closed the door, leaving them alone. The Queen removed her gloves, revealing trembling fingers. "Sergeant Bennett," she began, "what you saw is a matter of grave importance, not only to me, but to this entire institution." Thomas sat rigid, unsure what to say. She looked at him, her royal mask slipping away, revealing the woman beneath the crown. "I need your silence, and perhaps your understanding." He nodded. "Always, Your Majesty." She sighed, a sound more human than regal. "Then I must tell you why this cannot be known. Because if it is—" She paused, eyes glistening. "It will change everything the world believes about me, and about the royal bloodline itself." Thomas's chest tightened. Whatever was in that DNA report wasn't just a personal secret. It was a threat to the monarchy. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't simply about protecting the Queen's safety. It was about protecting her truth. And it had already begun to unravel. For the rest of the drive back to Buckingham Palace, the Queen said nothing. Her gaze stayed fixed on the rain-speckled window, London blurring into streaks of gray and gold. Beside her, Sergeant Thomas Bennett sat rigid, every muscle trained to stillness. But his mind was chaos. He'd sworn an oath to protect the royal family. But what happened when protection meant guarding a secret that could fracture it? When the car rolled to the palace gates, The world outside was still oblivious. No headlines, no whispers, just the steady rhythm of duty and tradition. Yet in the car, silence weighed heavier than gold. As Thomas helped the Queen out, she turned to him briefly. Her voice was composed again, but faintly cracked at the edges. "Thank you, Sergeant. What occurred today must remain between us. For everyone's sake." He nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty." But her next words lodged like a thorn in his conscience. "There may come a time," she said, "when silence will be the only loyalty that matters." She walked away, leaving him in the drizzle with more questions than answers. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. His small apartment near the royal barracks felt claustrophobic, the ticking clock merciless. He kept seeing the paper, the bold letters, the Queen's name, the sterile word paternity. He knew better than to speculate. But speculation was inevitable when your world was built on secrets. Why a DNA test? Why in secret? Why the tears? By midnight, the questions turned to unease. He considered calling Commander Harrison, but the Queen's request echoed louder. This must remain between us. So he did what royal guards do best. He waited until the phone rang. "Sergeant Bennett?" The voice was calm, practiced, and unfamiliar. "Edward Winters, Daily Sentinel." Thomas froze. How had a journalist found his number? "I understand you accompanied Her Majesty to a private medical facility this morning." Winters continued smoothly. "My sources say it wasn't exactly routine. Care to comment?" Thomas's throat tightened. "You have the wrong person." "I doubt that," the journalist replied, tone sharpening. "I also doubt the Queen would appreciate the press discovering her little test before she's ready to talk." Click. Thomas hung up before the man could say another word. His pulse hammered. The Queen's warning echoed in his mind. Silence will be the only loyalty that matters. He stared at the phone, torn between duty and dread. The walls suddenly felt thinner, the air colder. Then, at 12:07 a.m., a new message appeared. "Unknown number. We know what you saw. If you want to protect Her Majesty, meet at St. James's Park. 7 a.m. tomorrow. Alone." Thomas didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, thinking. Every instinct screamed trap, but something deeper told him otherwise. Someone inside the palace was moving pieces behind the scenes, and he had no idea who was playing the game. At dawn, he dressed in plain clothes, left the service pistol locked away, and slipped through the early fog of London towards St. James's Park. The park was nearly deserted. Only a few joggers, a handful of pigeons, and the distant sound of church bells. Thomas scanned the benches, the pathways, every shadow. At precisely 7 a.m., a woman in a dark overcoat appeared. Mid-50s, sharp-eyed, hair tied back in a bun. She sat beside him, without a word. "I'm Margaret Thornton," she said softly. "Records office. Royal Archives." Thomas stayed silent, cautious. "I know what you saw," she continued, "and I know why it matters." That got his attention. "The Queen's DNA test," she said, her voice low. "It wasn't for health reasons. It was about lineage, about who she really is." Thomas turned to her. "How do you know this?" "Because I found the letters," Margaret replied. "Letters her mother wrote during the war. Love letters to a man who wasn't Bruce Shand." Thomas felt his stomach drop. Margaret opened her briefcase, just enough for him to glimpse yellowed papers. Handwritten, dated 1943. "The man's name was Lord William Hertford," she said. "A decorated war hero. Married at the time, killed in combat. He never knew Rosalind Shand was pregnant." Thomas ran a hand over his face. "Are you saying the Queen?" "Yes," Margaret whispered. "Her biological father was Lord Hertford, which makes her half-sister to the current Duke of Somerset." Thomas stared out over the lake, trying to process it all. The revelation was staggering. Not only to the Queen's identity, but to the entire royal family's history. "Why tell me?" he finally asked. "Why not go directly to Her Majesty?" "Because there are people inside the palace who don't want her to know everything," Margaret replied gravely. "Some believe truth is too dangerous for the monarchy, but secrets always surface. I've watched them rot from the inside out." She handed him a small card. Call this number when you can get her a private audience. I'll bring the evidence. But be careful. Calls are being monitored. Thomas pocketed the card, every nerve on edge. If what you're saying is true, it's already bigger than both of us. Margaret's expression softened. Then do the right thing, Sergeant, not the safe thing. By mid-afternoon, Thomas was back inside the palace walls, the card burning in his pocket like a live coal. He'd kept his composure during inspections, saluted passing officers, even smiled when spoken to, but inside he was unraveling. Finally, unable to bear it, he approached Commander Harrison. "Sir, I need a private word. It concerns the Queen's security." Harrison eyed him suspiciously. "What kind of concern?" "One that should go directly to Her Majesty." Hours later, Thomas received a discreet summons. 2 p.m., private garden. "Come alone." The Queen was waiting on a stone bench, sunlight filtering through the roses. She looked calmer, but there was no mistaking the exhaustion in her eyes. "Sergeant," she greeted softly, "you've been restless. Speak freely." He hesitated. "Ma'am, someone approached me this morning. Margaret Thornton, from the archives. She claims to have information about your family history. Letters from your mother. Proof of a connection." The Queen's face didn't change, but her eyes did. Not surprise, confirmation. "I know," she said quietly. "We've been monitoring Margaret's activities for days. She's been watched, and so have you." Thomas froze. "You went to the park. We saw you," the Queen continued, voice calm but cutting. "But I'm not angry. In fact, I'm grateful. You confirmed something I needed to know, Margaret's intentions. She's telling the truth." Thomas exhaled slowly. "Then what will you do, ma'am?" Queen Camilla looked toward the palace, her profile framed by morning light. "I will meet the Duke of Somerset tomorrow. He deserves to know the truth before the world does. But first," she turned back to Thomas, "we must secure those documents before the wrong hands reach them." Her tone shifted, firm again, the voice of command. "You will retrieve them tonight. Quietly. Margaret will cooperate. She knows this is for the monarchy's sake." Thomas bowed his head. "Yes, Your Majesty." As he turned to leave, the Queen called after him, her voice softer now. "Sergeant Bennett," she said, "history remembers those who choose truth over fear. Don't let fear win." He met her gaze and nodded. That night, Thomas drove alone to the dim London streets toward a quiet cottage on the outskirts of the city. Margaret Thornton was waiting at the door, holding a weathered leather case. "Everything's in here," she said, handing it to him. "Letters, records, photographs." As Thomas walked away under the street lamps, the rain began again, soft, unrelenting. Somewhere inside that case lay the power to either destroy the monarchy or redeem it. And by morning, every royal secret inside Buckingham Palace would tremble on the edge of revelation. The truth, complete and undeniable. Thomas took the case carefully. "Then this," he said, "is the most dangerous box in Britain." Margaret smiled faintly. "Only if the wrong people open it." When Sergeant Thomas Bennett returned to Buckingham Palace that night, he felt the weight of the leather case like it contained more than just paper. It carried the pulse of the crown itself. Inside it were decades of letters, coded initials, and a story that could rewrite royal history. He signed into the west entrance and handed the case directly to the Queen's private secretary. The man didn't speak a word, only locked inside a steel safe behind the study wall. Thomas finally exhaled. "It's secure." The secretary nodded. "Her Majesty will see it first thing in the morning." But even as he left the room, Thomas knew something in the air had changed. The palace, normally quiet at night, felt tense, alive, as if it already knew a secret was moving through its veins. At dawn, Commander Harrison called him in again. "Sergeant, what have you been involved in?" Thomas stiffened. "Sir," Harrison's eyes narrowed. "There are inquiries from the upper offices. They know you've met with someone outside royal protocol, a woman named Margaret Thornton. They want answers." Thomas's pulse quickened. "With respect, sir, I acted under direct instruction from Her Majesty." "Did she confirm that?" "Yes," Thomas replied firmly. Harrison stared for a long moment, then sighed. I hope so, Bennett, because if she doesn't, they'll treat this as insubordination. Before Thomas could reply, the commander's phone buzzed. He glanced down, frowned, and gestured toward the door. Go. The Queen's secretary wants you immediately. The moment Thomas stepped into the Queen's residence, he could sense the urgency. Staff moved briskly through the halls. Phones rang nonstop, and the secretary met him with a pale face. It's begun, the man said grimly. There's been a leak. Thomas's stomach dropped. What leak? The secretary handed him a tablet, displaying the headline splashed across a major news site. Royal DNA scandal. Queen Camilla's secret test raises questions about lineage. Below it, the subheading. Sources close to Buckingham Palace confirm an internal panic over a private paternity report. Thomas's throat went dry. How did they find out? The clinic, the secretary said bitterly. A technician spoke to her supervisor. The supervisor sold the story. Thomas rubbed his temple. Her Majesty? In her study, the man said, Brace yourself, she's taking it hard. When Thomas entered, Queen Camilla was standing by the window. The morning light hit her face, illuminating the lines of exhaustion carved deep overnight. She turned slowly, clutching a tablet in her hand, the same headline staring back at her. They know, she whispered. Yes, ma'am. 47 seconds. Thomas blinked. Pardon? That's how long it took an article's posting for every newsroom in London to start calling, she said, her voice trembling between fury and disbelief. 47 seconds. That's all it took to lose control of my truth. She placed the tablet down and looked straight at him. Now the world will think I was hiding shame when I was only searching for answers. Thomas stood silently. The Queen's composure was unraveling, but beneath it, something stronger was building. Resolve. Has the king been told? She asked. Not yet, Your Majesty. Then he'll hear from me, she said, not from a headline. Within the hour, King Charles entered the study, his face grave. Thomas stepped aside as the Queen explained everything. The anonymous letter, the DNA test, the results, the hidden truth about her father. The king listened, stone-faced, until she said the name Lord William Hertford. Silence filled the room. Then, slowly, the king placed his hand over hers. Camilla, he said softly, the truth may sting, but lies would have poisoned everything. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time that day, she exhaled in relief. Then we face it together. Yes, Charles said, but we must also prepare for what comes next. The public will not be kind. Thomas remained by the door, a silent witness to history, as two monarchs decided to face scandal not with denial, but honesty. That evening, the Queen summoned the Duke of Somerset to Buckingham Palace. He arrived just before midnight, confused, concerned, unaware that his entire lineage was about to expand. Thomas escorted him down the dim corridors to the Queen's private study. From behind the closed door, muted voices rose and fell, shock, disbelief, and finally, something softer. When the door opened 2 hours later, the Duke's expression was pale but kind. He turned to the Queen and said quietly, "A sister, after all these years." Then, to Thomas's surprise, he smiled. It seems even royalty can find family in the most unexpected places. But outside the palace, the storm had already begun. By dawn, every front page in Britain was plastered with the same words: DNA bombshell. The story spread like wildfire. Talk shows dissected timelines. Tabloids speculated about motives. Commentators argued over what it meant for royal legitimacy. The monarchy's silence only fed the frenzy. Thomas watched from the security office as television screens blared the same headline over and over. Even soldiers whispered about it during shift changes. Then came the inevitable message: Her Majesty will address the nation at 9 a.m. By the time the cameras were set up in the palace drawing room, the Queen looked calm again, serene, almost unbreakable. Thomas stood just off-screen, his posture perfect, yet his chest tight with emotion. When the red light on the camera blinked on, Queen Camilla began to speak. In recent days, she said, her voice steady, Questions have arisen regarding my personal history. I chose to seek truth privately, believing that every person, royal or not, has the right to understand their roots. What I discovered was unexpected, but it does not change who I am, nor the love of the family that raised me. She paused, her eyes glistening with restrained emotion. I have learned that my biological father was Lord William Hertford, a man of courage who served his country in war. I take pride in his memory, and I cherish the father who raised me, Bruce Shand, whose love made me who I am today. I share this not as scandal, but as truth, because truth, she said softly, is the foundation of trust. The room fell silent. Thomas felt the hairs on his arms rise. He wasn't just hearing a speech. He was witnessing a monarch redefine dignity. The Queen continued, "To the people of this nation and to my family, I offer honesty. Let this be not a story of disgrace, but of discovery." When the camera light dimmed, the silence broke into quiet applause from the staff, the crew, even the guards watching from the corridor. The Queen turned, her gaze finding Thomas. "Sergeant Bennett," she said gently, "thank you for reminding me that even when truth hurts, it frees us." The scandal that had shaken Buckingham Palace was now a global story. Every television network replayed the Queen's broadcast, her calm voice cutting through the chaos like sunlight breaking through fog. But while the world debated, the palace itself entered a quiet transformation. The truth was no longer a threat. It had become something else, an anchor, an unspoken reminder that even the most powerful family on earth was still made of human hearts. A week later, the palace was calmer. Reporters still camped outside the gates, but the mood had changed. The headlines had softened from scandal to courage. Inside, Queen Camilla went about her duties with renewed composure. She smiled more often now, genuine smiles free from the old weight of secrecy. And Sergeant Thomas Bennett, once a silent figure in the background, now found himself at the heart of history's turning point. Early one morning, a message arrived for him. "Her Majesty requests your presence." Private study. 10 a.m. Thomas adjusted his uniform, smoothed his cuffs, and made his way through the corridors lined with portraits of kings and queens. Each one seemed to watch him, as if aware of how close he'd come to rewriting their legacy. When he entered the study, Queen Camilla was already waiting. The Duke of Somerset sat beside her, and King Charles stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Sergeant Bennett." The Queen greeted, her tone warm, almost maternal. "Please sit." He did, though he'd never grown comfortable sitting in the presence of royalty. "We wanted to thank you," she began, "for your honesty, your discretion, and your courage. You could have chosen silence, or worse, sold what you knew. Instead, you chose the path of truth." Thomas bowed his head. "I only did my duty, ma'am." The king smiled faintly. "Then you've redefined duty, Sergeant. Few would have handled it with such integrity." Camilla exchanged a glance with the Duke before continuing. "What began as a private pain has become a public lesson. I learned something vital through all this, that truth doesn't destroy legacies. It cleanses them." Thomas felt something shift inside him. He'd seen her face the fire, and now he saw what remained. Strength born not from title, but from humility. The Duke leaned forward. "You know," he said with a quiet chuckle, "if not for you, I might have lived the rest of my life never knowing I had a sister. I owe that to your honesty." Thomas managed a modest smile. "I'm honored, sir." "Which is why," the Queen said, sliding a small velvet box across the table, "we wish to present you with something that honors the truth you stood for." Thomas hesitated before opening it. Inside rested a silver medal embossed with the royal crest. Its inscription read, "For loyalty and courage in the service of truth." It wasn't just an award. It was an acknowledgement that he had done something few dared to do in any era of monarchy: speak the truth when silence was easier. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said, voice steady but eyes glistening. Camilla smiled softly. "You may one day lead the entire royal guard, Sergeant. The crown needs men who understand that protecting truth is the highest form of protection." Weeks passed. The storm of speculation faded into documentaries, opinion pieces, and, eventually, history books. But inside the palace, something extraordinary was happening. The Queen and the Duke of Somerset began appearing together at public events, charities, memorials, and even joint interviews. Their newfound sibling bond captured public affection. For once, the royal narrative wasn't about scandal or politics. It was about family, forgiveness, and rediscovery. Margaret Thornton, the archivist who'd unearthed the old letters, was publicly honored for her contribution to historical integrity. The Queen personally presented her with an award, stating, "The truth may sleep, but it never dies." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, whose clinic had inadvertently become ground zero for the scandal, was invited to tea at Clarence's house. The Queen forgave her with grace, calling it an error born of humanity, not malice. And Thomas, he continued his service quietly, never seeking recognition. But everyone in the palace knew his name now. 6 months later, the Queen summoned him once again, though this time her tone carried lightness. When Thomas entered, he found not tension but laughter. The Queen sat with the Duke and Margaret Thornton, tea steaming gently beside them. "Sergeant," Camilla said, "you may want to sit for this." He smiled. "Ma'am, we decided to establish something new," she said. "A foundation dedicated to preserving truth in British history, wartime archives, family records, and personal legacies that deserve light. We're calling it the Hertfordshire Foundation, in honor of both my fathers." Thomas's chest tightened. "That's remarkable, ma'am." "It will stand as proof," she said, "that truth heals more than it harms. And I would like you, Sergeant Bennett, to serve on its Security Advisory Board, to protect what matters most, not just people, but the integrity of history itself." He was speechless for a moment. Then he said softly, "It would be my honor." Months rolled by, and London's fascination with the DNA Queen evolved into admiration. What began as whispers of scandal had become a parable of strength and transparency. Even Parliament praised her candidness. For Thomas, life returned to routine, but his routine now carried quiet reverence. He had seen the monarchy stripped of its masks and rebuilt on honesty. One spring afternoon, as he stood at his post near the Rose Garden, he noticed Queen Camilla walking arm in arm with the Duke of Somerset. They were laughing about something, a sound so genuine it made Thomas smile beneath his stoic expression. When they passed him, the Queen paused. "Sergeant Bennett," she said warmly, "you look well." "Thank you, Your Majesty." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then added, "You taught me something that day in the clinic, when you chose truth over comfort. You reminded me that courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply refusing to look away." Thomas bowed deeply. "And you, ma'am, showed me that royalty is not about blood. It's about heart." The Queen's eyes softened. "Then perhaps we both learned the same lesson." She moved on, her laughter carrying across the garden. Thomas stood quietly, watching her disappear beyond the hedges, the sun glinting off the palace windows like liquid gold. That night, back in his small apartment, Thomas placed a silver medal on his desk beside a framed photograph, a candid image of the Queen, the King, and the Duke standing together after her public statement. Beneath it, written in the Queen's graceful handwriting, were just 5 words. "Truth is a crown's finest jewel." He stared at the words for a long time, then smiled. For the first time in his career, he realized he hadn't just guarded the royal family, he had guided them. And as London slept beyond his window, the guard who once feared the weight of truth now understood its power, that even the mightiest crown shines brighter when it reflects honesty.